Great, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, ArchiNet, for this second invitation. I'm really, really glad. There's a recognition on my research and in the studies that I'm undertaking in this interesting context. This is part of my ongoing research. My first lecture here was about Dubai, an attempt of the city itself of Dubai. This is also about Dubai, but not really the Dubai that we know, that we usually think of in terms of its urban dimension, the importance of Dubai as a global, one of the global capitals. And it is a very complex city that has very different faces. And so the research can keep going for years. It started quite a few years ago. And if the first part of this research was trying to find a sort of epistemological characters, even trying to figure out some ideas in terms of the philosophy that we can think about the urban dimension of Dubai. Now, there is also one part that really interests me, possibly even more than the urban side of the city. And it is actually what I call the peri-urban side of the city, which is actually in this sense is not a correct term, because peri-urban means the area of the city that is a buffer between what we consider landscape, what we consider outside the city, and the city itself. So in the Roman terms, that will be the urbi and orbi, you know, the distinction between what is a city properly in terms of its urbanity and what is outside the wall, right? The defensive walls that were built for defensive purposes. Now, of course, throughout the years, this boundary is not there anymore, and the edge, the border of the city, it's way more loose and always changing throughout time and throughout years. In this case, though, my thesis for this presentation is that the desert side is actually the peri-urban dimension of Dubai. In short, and in other words, that the desert side of the city is to support the city, and it's still part of the city itself. So we will go through a series of case studies, an overall introduction. I will borrow a theory from Rem Koolhaas in his very recent study on the desert side, where this research kind of mutuated that idea. And we will see some examples. As I said, Dubai is a complex place, right? He managed to even get to the point of defining new terms like Dubaization, the process of urbanizing a city with futuristic and pioneering architecture. Not many other cities have these properties, and he does that through some specific properties, you know, and criteria, which is, for instance, its way of developing so fast, you know, the speed of development that kind of create this condition where things, oops, this is going by itself, this kind of condition where, you know, you have different scale of projects, different scale of architecture that comes together without really an overall master plan that control this intervention. Of course, a big role is played by the infrastructure in the city, and this allows the development throughout its territory. And we've been discussing about this in the previous lecture. And so there is also this dimension of the spectacular component of the city, which is extremely important. You know, like I was making these examples. I was giving this example, for instance, of the dimension of the global village, a place that gathers more than 7 million visitors every year. Also, there is another dimension, which is the manipulation of nature. And probably not any other places we have this idea of manipulating the landscape and the nature, and so to blur that division between what is really natural and what is artificial. And this is reflected in the desert side, right? I need to stop for a moment this thing, because I think the presentation is going by itself. ArchiNet, if you can help me on this, please, just a sec, because I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
but,
you can go to slideshow.
Yeah.
If you cancel just the use timings and
here, like this.
Try it now.
And this. Okay. All right. And please, apologies. We've been doing our job. We've been testing everything. This is completely unexpected. This is the evil technology that is always there waiting for us. So I was just saying that, you see, even the desert that we think as an entity, a landscape entity that is actually desert, there is nothing much, becomes very busy, right? And in the dimension of the Dubai territory. And for me, it was really interesting. I've been living here in the country for 9 years now, and I always looked throughout my exploration in the territory of Dubai and the UAE, what was the interesting part of trying to understand the urban condition of the desert, the villages and the different structure and of the touristic resorts, or the other buildings that were designed and built in the desert, and how the city was progressing toward the desert. This was actually the interesting part for me and for my research. So let's start by talking about the role of population in the world in cities, right? So if you see the development between 1950 to 2035, you will see that there has been a progressive and seems unstoppable progression of the population in urban centers. So from 1950 to 2035, you will see how, especially in Africa and Middle East and Asia, the cities just became bigger and bigger and bigger. And there was one specific moment in 2012 where the urban population became bigger than the rural one. So now the process of urbanization got so fast and so big that the population in urban centers, the number became bigger. So it went beyond 50%. Now, as I said, I'm taking some definition from the research of Renkoulas, and in his research of a countryside, and that led to the exhibition that just opened in February in New York. He says that the countryside is now the front line of transformation, a world formerly dictated by the seasons and the organization of agriculture is now a toxic mix of genetic experiment, industrial nostalgia, seasonal immigration, territorial buying sprees, massive subsidized, incidental inhabitation, tax incentives, and so on. In other words, more volatile than most accelerated cities. So basically, its theory is that now the countryside has become has dismissed the role of supporting cities and become a real antagonist. So basically, it's not the city and the countryside feeding the city. Now the countryside has its own identity, right? And it becomes an antagonist. So my question was like, so what happens on the desert side of Dubai? Is that really the same? Is it the desert side of Dubai an antagonist to the urban dimension of the city? So to proceed in the investigation of Renkoulas, here you can see the city of cattle in Grand View, Idaho, that allows thousands of cows to be bred under intense farming conditions. As you can notice, the irregularity of the morphology of the landscape kind of clash with a very strict order, very functional and productive condition of the territory of the cattle city. And this is a condition that as a human beings, as a citizens of city, we try to have for quite several years and centuries. This is Palmanova in Italy, a symbol of the Renaissance architecture, where the human impact on cities was very strong. You know, like so the humanesimo, right? The influence of understanding and discovering the role of human beings instead of and placing them, I mean, at the center of the universe. So the proportions, geometries were taking place in the control of the space and the control of the cities. In this case, of course, there were very much defensive reason to define a closed system of a city that was created and designed so regularly. It went throughout history, even in the 19th century, we still see these like in the JEDDAH plan of Barcelona, very regular in search of this order and control through master plans that were not only designed, approved, and also executed and will last for many years. Now it seems that this condition is lost, and the expansion of contemporary cities don't follow the projects, don't follow master plans. The condition, the economic condition, the cultural conditions of the world, the globalization influences expansion of cities without really control. And this is maybe a more typical image that describes the contemporary condition of urban entities. And so now there is also something else to consider, like how really the agricultural side, the countryside has changed with the introduction of new technologies. And as you can see, the farmer himself is not the same person that used to be before. Therefore, the processes and landscapes and the cultivation changed the image of the countryside in Europe and in other countries. And some very new typologies and images of the world are coming from this context. And as you can see, these, for instance, are lights at night in this landscape. So this, of course, we are architects, and I'm interested in understanding how architecture changes in this context. This is the world's largest building, the Tesla Gigafactory. And the quote here, it's boredom is hypnotic, it's banality breathtaking, the world's largest building. So new typologies, new architecture that we're not really used to see around, and they are somehow very far from context. So we don't really see them, but they are there. We are not really aware. So a very deep research is necessary to come to contact with them. The interior spaces also changes that are kind of uncanny. You know, we're not used to this new process of digitalization of cultivation and this process that happens on the countryside nowadays. Now, finally, there is also the change in the social condition. On the left side here on the slide, you can see the original population that used to live in the villages that Renkulas are taken into consideration for his research. They were the original one at the beginning of the last century. You could really see the relationship between inhabitants and that area and that part of the world. While right now everything is mixed, globalization brings to completely new social condition. One example is that the famous Grana Padano cheese in Italy, you know, like one of the most famous cheese that are produced typically originally in Italy. Now, it's basically mostly produced by Indian immigrants, right? The Sikhs who actually make the Italy famous Grana Padano cheese. And this obviously changed the social context and therefore the urban context of the countryside. So Renkulas does this interesting experiment. It takes a rectangle, and highlighting this rectangle, I think it's 12 kilometers long, 12 kilometers by 3. And he places this rectangle of a territory into the Netherlands that he knows that's where he is from. the one that he knows the best. And somehow in this countryside is analyzing within this rectangle all the functions that he can find, so that he can figure out the identity of this territory. And he found many interesting events, right? There are celebrity children's book author, because some people are moving out from the city itself and moves to the countryside to bring new professionals, new figures, new people that before were not living on the countryside, as we can see, especially during the pandemic, with this home working, and we all work from home now. Basically, theoretically, we can work from anywhere. But there are also tourist facilities, bike ferries, and converted farm party center paradise, art galleries, something that you will never expect to be there. Of course, construction company, or hotels, or some other sort of artist, country western dancing in Netherlands, right? So there are lots of functions that were not there before, that kind of create this antagonist in the condition and the relationship between countryside and the urban centers. So my question was, what if we take the same rectangle of 12 kilometers by 3, and we place it in the desert side, which is not the countryside of the UAE, of Dubai, and let's see what happens. That's it. Nothing happens. Nothing happens because we cannot think of the same density. That's the most important data that we need to consider in this kind of research. So that rectangle needs to be modified, and it has to be modified because we need to insert in this research some other data, starting, as I said, from the notion of density. Now, if you see at these maps and this diagram, you can see how the density changes a lot from the central part within Dubai, that you go from the highest density area, which kind of matches where the labor camps of workers are. As you can see, there are more than 30,000 people per square kilometer, and you move out into the desert, you will see that in Gadir, Barashi, and sorry for butchering all these names, you will find that 0.09878 people person per square kilometer. So the density is completely different than a urban, than a desert, countryside European side, let's say. And also the change, how this thing changed, because there are some level of transformation. So the density that changes between 2010 to 2018, in some areas, while in the center of the city, it went down of almost 22%. In the desert, because it starts from almost 0, even with 7 persons, it goes up of 518%. And there are some other areas like this, and this is a trend. Some people also here, although much slower than in Europe, are moving out to the desert. The other condition that we need to keep in mind is the foreign citizenship. So in certain areas, you can see, especially in the desert, it reaches sometimes the 100% of foreign citizenship. Certain traditional areas where the traditional villages are, they can reach around 65%. And this is because of the presence of course, foreign workers, but also maids that move into local traditional families and to help them. And also the other data that we might want to look at is the ratio male-female. And as you can see, in some of these differently than in the center, that is kind of mixed in the desert, there is always this relation between a 70% of male and female 30%. So the sociological and geographical and the kind of landscape condition are very different, so they cannot be compared. So we need to also study how this territory has developed. And obviously, it's interesting to to look at the presence of the role of infrastructure and how the desert kind of connected the system of connection through the desert to the city. And of course, in this context, what plays a very important role is the presence of the oasis, the source of water that you can see in this map, in this schematic map. And casually, the system of networks of roads, they connect these points, these different points, the water sources, because obviously coming from the desert and traveling through the desert, you go from one source of water to another source of water. And that's where the traditional urban settlement, desert settlements were located. And after that, we can then try to figure out a new rectangle. A new rectangle has a different dimension. Let's say, for instance, and very empirically, that this rectangle is 32 kilometers wide. And in the case of Dubai, we can start analyzing all the different functions. And you can see that there are some public functions, some governative functions, but most of them are functions that are in supporting the nature of Dubai as a tourist destination. So even the heritage village, the different parties, farmhouses, lots of desert tourism, and some other functions that might be too expensive to locate in the city, so they're located in the desert. And by looking at some of these case studies, we can kind of try to figure out different categories. For instance, Margam, what I call one of the traditional settlements. Traditional settlements because there was an idea of agriculture, also in the desert, as far as there is an available source of water. Agriculture that takes place in certain specific moments in the territory, and also, I don't know if you see my cursors on the bottom left, they're always related to a new expansion, urban expansion, that the government provided housing for the local inhabitants. And as we can see, this urban design of these settlements always follow the same kind of typology, which I call the spin wheel because it doesn't really have a name. So I call it because it has this circular configuration around a void in the center, an empty space that supposedly would receive in the future, in the development of the urban settlement, the services. Usually only the mosque was built, but this is a system and you can observe everywhere in the territory of Dubai and the other Emirates. Casually and interestingly, this is also the way how the city developed, especially in the past. And this is a portion of Jumeirah. As you can see, there is also the spin wheel kind of configuration of houses and villas, but then the center that's supposed to receive the services, then it didn't. The price of the land was very high and very desirable for new development. So instead of services, most of the time there are more villas. But this kind of typology is keep going and deserve probably a better analysis. Going back to Margam, we see how the image of this part of the desert is very different and is somehow unexpected, because there was an idea also in the past, and also one of the, let's call it an obsession of the Sheikh Zayed, the father, so-called the father of Dubai, to turn the desert in green, right, in agricultural land. So this is nothing new, because there was the potential as far as the water was accessible. We studied Margam during a course that I was doing at the American University of Sharjah in my urban design course. And now I'd like to show the work of two students that have been studying specifically this urban settlement, in the desert. I will start a movie, and I hope you can hear it. Please let me know if you can't.
सब्जी बाद में मालिक मार्केट में लेके जाएगा।
कौन सा मार्केट?
मार्केट में लुलु डेफिर मार्केट, ये बड़ा मार्केट है ना, दुबई में आबिर मार्केट, ये पहला जाता है आबिर मार्केट। मालिक को ऑफिस होता है, रूम होता है, उधर से बड़ा मार्केट है ना, वो मार्केट में ऐसा सप्लाई करता है।
हाँ, क्या क्या सब्जियाँ आप डालते हैं?
बहुत ये मालूम है, कोरिएंडर, जॉर्जी लाल सीरा गिरे नहीं है, एक फोटो में गया।
और आप कब से यहाँ काम कर रहे हैं? कितने साल हो गए?
हमें इसमें 3 साल हो गए।
3 साल।
आप किधर से?
अम्बागली।
आप क्या उधर क्या करते थे?
मेरे को काम करने का सब्जी अच्छा करने का ये तालीम दे, ये काम है।
तो आप इधर भी वही करते हैं?
और वो आदमी लोग है ना, वो आदमी लोग सारा पाकिस्तानी, वो आदमी लोग को काम है जरूरत में बीज डालने का, टक्कर लगाने का काम उसका, और सब्जी काट करता है। ये बड़ा वाला रूम है ना, इसमें बंडल को काम सब्जी को ऐसा करके बंडल बनाते हैं। बाद में गाड़ी आता है, गाड़ी लेके जाते हैं।
Okay, I hope you can hear me again. Here I see another example after Margam that is more of a traditional village. We can look at now at what are the resorts, the tourist component of the desert. And more or less there are two main typologies in terms of architectural expression, architectural idea of how to represent and portray the spaces, tourist spaces for tourism in the desert. Al-Maha is the Bedouin camp, as I call it, and of course, is not very common. There is not much left, unfortunately. But the desert can be stunning, can be really, really beautiful landscape, especially if it's intact. We also discuss about this idea of conservation of the desert in this lecture. And in this kind of setting, you can find one of the two typologies, which is what you want to think of a sort of a traditional Bedouin camp. That's the way how to interpret the opportunities of lodging in the desert. So this is obviously is there to create a kind of a very tight relation with the space, with the possibilities, although, of course, common areas are there to remind of somehow an image of a culture that is more orientalist, and it brings some of the traditional characters into the architecture of the resorts. The other typology, we can call it the Arabian Fortress, right? And this idea that someone can discover almost the ruins of an ancient civilization, and it's a very romantic idea of bringing the idea of this castle that is almost impossible to conquer, right? And again, the architecture is portraying the Arabian, so-called Arabian style for these spaces in terms of achieving level of extra luxury. Now, there are some other that I find more interesting case studies. One is the Sevens. The Sevens is what I call the Rugby Etherotopia. Now, Etherotopia is a complex term, but basically this is a stadium that only operates for 1 week a year, mostly. there are some other ancillary facilities, some other activities throughout the year, but not many. And I want to borrow some of the slides from the previous lecture I gave here, and I was talking about this concept of heterotopias. The difference with an utopia is that the utopia is an ideal society, right, that possesses highly desirable or perfect qualities, but it is not a real space. So we use the term by Michel Foucault, defined by Michel Foucault, heterotopias, which are concrete physical places, like, for instance, the oasis, the classical idea of oasis. And the heterotopia describe places of otherness and of marginality, sites of difference in relation to the hegemonic space of society that surrounds it. So heterotopias are components of that describes that being completely marginal to the hegemonic state, to the desert in this case. And in this case, you can see how in the 7th, it's really a place that works only for 1 week a year. And if you can look at the list of events that happen throughout the year, I highlighted the 2012 year that had to be a very difficult year because there was only a pedigree pet show. But somehow in that week, this very unknown kind of and forgotten place in the middle of the desert becomes like this, and it changed completely its entity. And it's also changed the way how people use the space, because it becomes almost the occasion for the carnival of Dubai. And the carnival, traditionally in every culture around the world, is the moment where the society changes. The society allows itself to do things that they never did throughout the year, kind of to express some sort of freedom, and in this case to dress up with a very strange costumes. The best architectural drawing that I found, and I think it's the one that better communicate the spatial properties of the place, is actually it's an infographic in this map that shows all the different functions that are surrounding the events that only happens, as I say, 1 week. Because of this, as you can see in the website, they are counting the days, so 33 days, 0 hours, 12 minutes, that makes provides the understanding, I mean, creates the understanding of this place as what you can call an heterochrony or heterochronia, which is an heterotopia linked somehow to the notion of time. And there is the concept of heterotopia was actually motivated by biology, and in evolutionary development biology, heterochrony is any genetically controlled difference in the timing or duration of a developmental process in an organism compared to its ancestors or other organisms, which really reminds it can be interpreted as a good definition for the 7th stadium. And so now the only part that needs to be covered to complete our understanding of the desert side of Dubai is about the new projects, the new residential projects, because now the idea is that we can actually build beyond the urban growth boundary line. And we'll see in a moment what is this about. And this is portrayed with this slogan, where do you go to dream? Now, we need to look at a moment what's going on in Dubai, of course. These are the Dubai average residential prices. And as you can see, there was a peak, very high peak in the 2008, and then the crisis of 2009, 2010 went really low, and then they went up to 2014 because of the idea that somehow in 2020 there was going to be an expo. But then that didn't really happen, so the descent of the prices started, and now with the pandemic got even worse. But the point is that with these prices, the fall of the prices also kind of changed the desire for the typology that was the majority of the products in the residential market and real estate, which were high-end apartment and villas. As you can see, in most of the cases, we reach almost a 30% of depreciation of the value in maybe 1 or 2 years. So now Dubai fears the end of its built it and they will come model, because it actually there is an oversupply of residential units in the order of almost 30,000 units a year, and that causes a change in the perception of what can be designed and built in the residential market and how to live in Dubai. So there is, of course, a rise on the affordable homes, because if before all the buildings were targeting the very high end, now, you know, there is a significant shift from luxury to affordable housing. Here it says that over the last few years, there's been a significant shift in development of affordable units in the residential market, and demand has been quite strong. But where to find a place, a possible location for this affordable homes, affordable housing, if the land is so pricey, especially in the center of the city? Of course, in the desert. There is some of the projects, probably the most important future project is this one by Emaar Properties. It's a new 25 billion dirham project, the Valley, and for now has 4,500 residential units planned in the desert of Dubai, and in an area of 200 hectares. I heard the rumors that the residential units might reach even 15,000 in number. And as you can see here, it's interesting, this project, because the master plan of Dubai of 2010 was actually creating an urban growth line that shouldn't be passed, shouldn't be, you know, like no new substantial development should be built beyond that line. And you can see here how the existing urban area is highlighted in yellow, and these are the non-urban settlements, some of them like Margam we were considering before. So this is the non-urban growth line, and as you can see, the valley is going to be here, very close to the 7th stadium, actually. So significantly beyond. And why? Because now, in order to provide affordable house, the cost of land needs to be very low. And so, you know, you need to think of this extremely peri-urban condition of the site. But then looking at the architecture and the idea of space of this project, really there is nothing about the desert. I mean, this is a very, very nice, very beautiful urban space with common spaces. I hope we will still be able to live this way after this pandemic, but the notion of desert completely disappeared for the project, being very somehow affordable home, but on the luxury side as well. It's a very attractive public space, but the desert is really, the presence of the deserts is really questionable, especially when it comes to the scale of the urban and houses development. So there is the end of this lecture. I want to say that there is obviously an unstoppable development of the city, of the urban center toward the desert. And the question that will actually drive possibly my future research is, what is the sustainable future of peri-urban settlements? I'm really interested to understand what will happen to these villages, and what architecture can do and urban design can do in order to improve the condition and probably maintain the characteristics and the cultural and impact of these kind of projects on their future development. Now, the very last question that we can ask is that if all the UAE deserts are the same, because they might be different, right? The desert of Dubai from the desert of Sharjah. And just as a sort of a glimpse, I'm not going to go into this chapter of because, as I say, this is not a different story. This is just a different desert. If we do the same experiment of taking the same 32 kilometers wide rectangle in the desert of Sharjah, the configuration of elements and functions is significantly different. As you can see, the desert of Sharjah is not really the same as the one in Dubai. I mean, the functions that are located there, the architecture that is located there is not so intimately connected to the city. Or maybe is not intimately connected to the notion of tourism, you know, to support the tourism. So it still has an identity, and somehow it reflects the identity of Sharjah. Sharjah being one, possibly the cultural capital of the UAE. Also here it's reflected in some of his projects, in some of his architecture. And somehow there are also some urban entities, again, that are very strange. Like, for instance, this place called Al-Madam. Oops, Al-Madam. Wait a moment. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to share screen again. I think we had the same problem before. I just want to close this, and I'll just show this. So Al-Madam, you can find it is what I call the Roundabout City. The Roundabout City.
Still, Cristiano,
yes,
you
yes.
didn't see the screen yet.
Oh, sorry. So I need to share it again. Share the screen. Thanks for letting me know. I will share it like this, if it's okay. It's the last two slides.
Yes.
So this is what I call the Roundabout City. It's a very, very interesting new city. Somehow it's on the way to Oman, and of course pays homage to the fact that there is a transition between one country to another one. There are more or less 3,000 people, or there used to be 3,000 people going along this road. So the city happens around this roundabout mostly. And you can find a lot of different functions. And the most curious are the fact that there is a bird shop, and there is even a seafood restaurant, which I want to go soon. And if it's possible, I want to go and check it out. The other example is, for instance, the difference how the desert in Sharjah provides these tourist facilities, and even the tourist facilities are different, because somehow Sharjah hosts probably more defined and more sophisticated concept of how architecture can interact with the desert landscape. And so this Al-Faya Lodge by an architect shows how modernism actually can step back and gives more importance to the landscape in its minimalistic architectural expression. Or also this beautiful museum by Dabaga Architects, who I know she was one of your speakers, that also reflects this kind of cultural component. So I think, as I say, that this is this is another story for another desert, and maybe the excuse of coming back and tell another story about my research on desert. So thank you. Let's see if this one went back, and sorry for all the
it's okay.
issues. We tried our best, but somehow,
it's okay.
Somehow it didn't happen.
So we started receiving, first, thank you for the presentation.
Yes. Yes.
We already started receiving questions, and if anyone have questions, please send it now. Okay, this first question from Najla. I would like to thank you, Mr. Cristiano. We need to listen more about the philosophy of the Dubaization that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just give us a brief about it?
Well, it's. I think that last time I gave more than 1 hour lecture, and I would suggest. I saw that you publish these lectures online, and so I think they are on YouTube. And please, I will be, my honor if you.
I will copy it again here.
Yes, and provide the link so that you can have. More, I mean, it's a very complex theme, and it deserves some time to explore the concept a little bit more. But in very short, in few words, I can say that I define Dubai as a spectacular heterotopia, mutuating the concept defined by two philosophers. One was the board for the spectacle, for the notion of spectacle, and one was Michel Foucault. So I'm not quite sure if I should go a little bit deeper in this, but please, I invite you to go and see my previous lecture where I explain in details this notion.
Yes, I already shared it in the chat now.
Thank you so much.
This question from Mustafa: where would the people in the peri-urban areas work?
Yeah, well, they work in the city. They work in the city. And when we investigate some of these centers, we saw that most of the inhabitants are the component, the elderly, you know, the oldest people in the family that are kept in a much more quiet and healthy kind of environment instead of keeping them in the city. And as I said, the foreign citizenship of the desert is mostly because of the assistance of the maids that also live with this family. So yes, they commute. So they drive every day. The drive is not that far. Even the project of the ballet is only, let's say, 30 minutes from the center of the city. So it's, the territory is not that big.
He had a second part of the question. What about the future of the city, or of the city? Should peri-urban areas be adopted?
Well, you know, the point is that somehow Dubai always choose the very easy path, you know, like the one that is very much related to the notion of profit and is conditioned by the economical condition of the world, of the global condition of the world. So I believe that the right path will be to leave alone the desert, work on developing its own identity, because that's where really the original culture should be found. And the city that already achieved the status of a global city then should work in its own densification. I mean, I live in an area in Dubai called Al-Jaddaf, where really we have a condition of like mushrooms buildings built here and there in what is called a classical leapfrog development, you know, a frog that jumps from one side to another one without an organic development. There is lots of space to take care of, especially because I think that the challenge in this kind of cities happens in between the buildings, not in the buildings themselves. That's where the public space happens. That's where the quality of spaces can be designed and developed. And so the densification of the city of Dubai should be the first aim, you know, the first target in terms of raising the quality of the urban space. The desert provides very cheap land. And so it's easy to think that we can go and do kind of cheap project and provide larger spaces, but this is the story of urban sprawl. And we saw how urban sprawl around the world caused lots of problems, caused lots of comfort to the people that wants to get for the same price much larger houses, but at the same time in the overall economy of the environment, it causes lots of problems starting from pollution. And so I think that's what will be the future, and that's why it's interesting to study more. Yeah.
Yes. Well, this is all the questions that we had. We received a lot of compliments thanking you for this research, and we are looking forward to see the results in the future, inshallah.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm very happy, and thanks again for inviting me, and thanks for the attention, and please apologies for the little technical problems that we had.
Yeah, it happens. It's okay.
So we tried, but this time it didn't go very well.
Yeah, you know. Okay. Thank you a lot. Take care.
Yes, thank you very much.
See you tomorrow, everyone.
Good
night.
Thank
you. Take care. Bye.